6 men in black suits surrounded her mother's grave. Elena froze at the top of the cemetery steps, cheap flowers trembling in her grip. Her mother's plot, always quiet, always forgotten, was occupied. Their polished shoes didn't belong on the cracked path. Their posture screamed military training. They weren't family. They weren't mourners. They were something else entirely. At the center stood a man she'd never seen. Tall, dark-haired, hands in his coat pockets, head slightly bowed, composed like someone who'd never asked permission for anything in his life. Her first thought was irrational but immediate. They've come to repossess the dead. What else is left to take? Hey! Her voice cut sharper than intended. What the hell are you doing at my mother's grave? Every head turned. The man in the middle was last to look up. When he did, his gaze hit her like something physical. Dark eyes, too focused, studying her the way someone assesses a threat. Sofia Marchetti's daughter. He knew her mother's name without looking at the headstone. Elena's blood went cold. Who are you? Dominic Castellano. The name landed like a punch. She'd seen it in headlines, heard it whispered in her old neighborhood. Your mother saved my sister's life 10 years ago. I've been paying her hospital bills ever since. The funeral costs, this plot, everything. Elena stopped breathing. The anonymous donor, the burial she couldn't afford, the debt that mysteriously shrank every month. It was him. All of it. Why? She whispered. Because I owed her. He stepped closer. But that's not why I'm here today. His eyes swept the cemetery perimeter. Someone else found this grave. Someone who's been watching you. And they know you matter to me now. What does that mean? It means you're no longer invisible, Miss Marchetti. His voice dropped. It means they've already been inside your apartment. And it means if you don't come with me right now, you won't survive the week. The wind scattered dead leaves across her mother's headstone. 24 hours ago, her biggest problem was making rent. Now she was standing in a graveyard, learning her dead mother had once saved a mob boss's sister, and that single act of kindness had just made Elena a target. She looked at the grave, at the armed men, at the stranger who'd been silently paying her debts for years. Why should I trust you? Dominic held her gaze. Because your mother did. Elena stayed where she was for a few more seconds, staring straight into the dark eyes of the man in front of her. The cemetery wind still blew cold across her shoulders, but the cold inside her cut even deeper. Her mother had trusted this man. Her mother had kept this secret for 10 years, and now Elena was standing at a crossroads she had never chosen. At last she swallowed hard and nodded. Fine, I'll go with you. Dominic did not look relieved, and he did not look victorious. He only signaled to his people, and they began to move like a machine that had been programmed long ago. But I need to stop by my apartment first, Elena added, her voice firmer than she meant it to be. I need to get my things. Dominic paused and turned to look at her. It's not safe. I don't care. I don't have anything except what's in that apartment. You can drag me along, but you can't make me leave everything behind without saying a word. A silence stretched tight as a drawn wire. Then Dominic let out a breath, so light it was almost impossible to hear. 10 minutes, not more. The black SUV carried them through the familiar streets of Queens. Elena sat in the back seat, keeping a gap between herself and Dominic on purpose. Through the glass she watched the grocery stores, the cheap bars, the street corners she had walked past 1,000 times. Everything still looked exactly like yesterday, but Elena knew nothing would ever look the same again. When the car stopped in front of the worn old building where she lived, Dominic got out with her. 2 men in black suits went ahead, and 2 stayed behind. Elena felt as if she were marching through a small army, and she was the prisoner being escorted. The stairs up to the 3rd floor creaked the way they always did. The familiar damp, musty smell rushed into her nose. But when Elena opened the apartment door, she stopped short. Everything looked normal. Too normal. The old sofa was still in the corner. The pile of bills was still stacked on the table. The dishes were still in the sink from yesterday morning. But something was wrong. She could not name it right away, but her body knew. As if the air in the room had been breathed by someone else and left behind, Elena stepped inside slowly. Her eyes swept across the small space, and then she saw it. The dresser drawer sat slightly to the left, not fully closed the way she always left it. The photo of her mother on the bookshelf had been turned, its face aimed toward the window instead of toward the bed, the way Elena always set it. The notebook she hid under her pillow now lay beneath the mattress. Someone's been in here. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from anger. This was the only place she had. The last shabby little corner she could still call her own, and they had violated it. Dominic said nothing. He stepped past her and went straight to the electrical outlet near the bed. With one quick movement, he pulled the plug, took out a small knife, and pried off the outer plate. Inside, a small black device sat neatly among the wires. A listening device, Dominic said, his voice holding no surprise. Professional grade, expensive. It's been running for at least a few weeks. Elena stared at the tiny object in his hand, her throat tightening until it hurt. A few weeks. They had heard everything. The sound of her crying late at night when she missed her mother, the phone calls with debt collectors, the moments when she talked to herself because the loneliness was too heavy. Everything. They had heard it all. Why? She asked, her voice strangled. Why would they do this to me? I'm nothing. I don't have anything. Dominic looked at her, and for an instant Elena saw something flicker in his eyes. Not pity, almost guilt. Because they're looking for my weakness, he said. And they think they've found it. The phone in Dominic's pocket vibrated. He answered and listened in silence. Elena watched his face, the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes darkened like the sky before a storm. Okay, he said into the phone. A single word, then hung up. When he turned back to Elena, all the calm he'd worn before was gone. They know you're here. We have to go. Right now. What? But my things. No time. Dominic took her wrist, not roughly, but with unmistakable finality. Move. Outside the window, an engine roared from the end of the street. Elena barely had time to reach across the bookshelf, snatch her mother's photo, and shove it against her chest under her shirt. Then Dominic pulled her out of the apartment, down the stairs, through a back door she had not even known could be opened. Tires shrieked out on the street, sharp and urgent. Someone shouted in a language she did not understand. Footsteps pounded on the stairs she had just left. Elena sat in the car, her heart hammering wildly, her hand clamped tight around her mother's photo through the fabric of her shirt. 24 hours earlier, she had been an invisible girl, poor and lonely but safe. Now she was running with a Mafia boss, leaving behind everything she had ever had. And the only thing she carried with her was her mother's face, smiling from an old frame, as if she were still telling Elena that everything was going to be all right. If you're hooked, smash that like button and subscribe. Trust me, this story's just getting started. The ride lasted nearly an hour, cutting through the familiar streets of Queens before pushing into a stretch of suburbia Elena had never set foot in. She sat in silence, her mother's photo still pressed tight to her chest, eyes turned toward the window without truly seeing anything. Dominic sat beside her, silent too, his phone held to his ear again and again, but he mostly listened, rarely answering. When the car turned onto a road shaded by towering old oak trees, Elena began to understand she was moving into a completely different world. A wrought iron gate more than 10 feet high swung open slowly, and 2 guards nodded in greeting as the SUV passed through. A stone-paved drive curved through a garden trimmed to flawless precision, white rose bushes blooming along both sides, as if welcoming an honored guest. And then the house appeared. No, not a house. A mansion. 3 stories, a gray stone facade, tall, narrow windows like the eyes of some ancient creature watching her. A marble fountain sat in the center of the courtyard, water murmuring as if it had never heard of the chaos beyond these walls. Elena thought of her apartment. Mold-stained walls, stairs that creaked, an outlet hiding a listening device. She had spent 27 years of her life in corners the light had forgotten, and now she was stepping into a place where the light itself seemed designed to fall exactly where it should. The SUV stopped at the front entrance. A man younger than Dominic stepped out, tall and lean, with softly curling black hair, and what caught Elena's attention most was the smile on his mouth, the first smile she had seen since she'd set foot in the cemetery this morning. "So this is the girl who made you mobilize the entire Alpha team just to escort her?" the younger man said, his tone laced with teasing. "Marco." Dominic spoke only one word, but it was both an introduction and a warning. Marco shrugged, completely unfazed. He turned to Elena, the smile still there. "Marco Castellano, little brother of the block of ice standing next to you. Welcome to the happiest house on Long Island." Elena did not know how to respond. She gave a small nod, her lips shaping a greeting that never quite became sound. Marco didn't seem bothered. He only winked at her and stepped aside, clearing the way for Dominic to lead her inside. Inside was even more lavish than out. The polished marble floor reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers. A curving oak staircase rose to the upper level. Oil paintings hung on the walls, Italian landscapes Elena had only ever seen in books. Everything was beautiful. Everything was perfect. and everything made Elena feel as if she were suffocating. A middle-aged woman in uniform guided her up to the second floor, down a long hallway lined with dozens of closed doors. The room meant for Elena was at the very end. It was bigger than her old apartment. A king-size bed dressed in spotless white sheets, deep blue velvet curtains, a mahogany vanity with a gold-framed mirror, a private bathroom lined in marble. Everything was foreign. Nothing belonged to her. "If you need anything, press the button by the bed," the woman said, and then she closed the door behind her. Elena stood in the middle of the room, her mother's photo still in her hand. She looked around at the luxury wrapping itself around her, and the only feeling she could name was the feeling of being a prisoner. This prison was more beautiful than anywhere she had ever lived, but it was still a prison. The door could open, but she knew she could not leave. She set her mother's photo on the nightstand, sat on the edge of the bed, and tried to breathe. Everything had happened too fast. This morning she had been an anonymous girl visiting her mother's grave. Now she was sitting in the mansion of a mafia boss, hunted by people she couldn't even put faces to, over a debt she hadn't known existed. Crying. Elena lifted her head. A child's crying, small and choked, drifted from somewhere out in the hallway. She stood, went to the door, and cracked it open. The corridor was empty, the lights a soft gold. The crying continued, frail as a kitten separated from its mother. Elena didn't know what pushed her to step out. Maybe instinct. Maybe the memory of nights when she had cried like that too, when her mother lay in the hospital, when she was alone in a dark apartment and no one came. She followed the sound past 2 closed doors to a room where light spilled through a door left slightly ajar, and she saw Dominic Castellano, the powerful mafia boss, the man who could order someone killed without blinking, was kneeling on the floor. In front of him was a little girl, about 5 years old, with curly black hair, eyes swollen red, tears streaming down her cheeks. The child wore pajamas printed with stars, both arms locked around Dominic's neck as if she feared he might disappear. "Uncle, I'm scared," the little girl's voice trembled. "I dreamed about monsters." "There are no monsters, Lucia." Dominic's voice was so gentle. Elena almost didn't recognize it. "I'm here. I won't let anyone scare you." He held the child against him, one hand smoothing her hair, the other patting her back in soft, steady beats. The motion was practiced and natural, as if he had done this 100 times. Elena stood there, rooted in place, unable to move. What she was seeing was the opposite of everything she thought she knew about this man, the cold boss, the kind of man who could make people shake with a single look. Now he was on his knees, holding a child crying from a nightmare, his voice light as a breath of wind, and Elena realized the world she had just stepped into was far more complicated than she had ever imagined. Elena could barely sleep that night. The image of Dominic on his knees, holding a crying child, kept replaying in her mind, clashing with everything she thought she knew about him. She lay on a bed larger than anything she had ever owned, staring up at the soaring ceiling, and wondered where she belonged in this chaotic story. By the time the first morning light slipped through the curtains, Elena was already awake, pulling on the same old clothes she had brought and stepping out of her room. The house was quieter than she expected. Her footsteps sounded soft against the wood floor as she went down the stairs, following the smell of coffee toward the kitchen. The kitchen was as big as her entire old apartment, with a marble island and tall leather stools. Marco was sitting there, one hand around a coffee mug, the other scrolling on his phone. He looked up at the sound of her steps, and that familiar smile returned. "You're up early. After a day like yesterday, I figured you'd sleep until noon." Elena didn't answer. She just stood in the kitchen doorway, not sure she was allowed to step inside. Marco seemed to read her thoughts. "Coffee's in that pot. The fridge has everything you need. Don't be shy. This isn't a prison." She walked in, poured herself a cup, then sat on a stool a few steps away from him. Silence stretched for a few minutes, until tiny footsteps sounded in the hallway. Elena turned and saw the little girl from last night standing at the kitchen entrance, black hair mussed, wide eyes fixed on Elena with the wary look of a wild creature meeting a stranger. "Lucia, come in here, sweetheart." Marco waved her over. "Come meet our guest." Lucia didn't move. She stood there, both hands gripping the hem of her pajama top, her gaze drilling into Elena as if trying to decide whether this woman was safe. Elena said nothing. She stayed still, trying to make herself as small and as non-threatening as possible. She remembered that feeling, the feeling of a child who had lost too much and no longer dared to trust anyone. At last, Lucia darted past Elena, climbed onto the stool beside Marco, and pressed herself tight against her uncle. She shot Elena one more glance, then buried her face in Marco's sleeve, refusing to engage. "Don't take it personally," Marco said quietly to Elena. "She doesn't talk to anyone except me and Dominic. It's been 2 years. 2 years?" Marco looked down at the child clinging to him, his voice dropping lower. Lucia's parents were Dominic's sister and her husband, Isabella and Thomas. They died in a car accident 2 years ago. Lucia was in the back seat, watching it happen. She didn't speak a single word for the first 6 months. Elena felt as if someone had punched her in the chest. She looked at the 5-year-old trying to disappear into her uncle's side, and she saw herself 22 years ago. Not a car accident, but still loss, still loneliness, still watching the world collapse when you were too young to understand why. Dominic took her in immediately, Marco went on. He canceled every meeting, every deal, for the first 3 months just to stay with Lucia. That's the only time I've ever seen him step away from work for anything. Elena thought of last night. Dominic kneeling, holding a crying child, his voice so gentle she hadn't recognized it. Now she understood. That wasn't an unusual moment. That was every night for the past 2 years. Lucia shifted in Marco's lap, her head peeking out from his sleeve. She looked at Elena again, still wary, but with a thin thread of curiosity now. "Who are you?" Her voice was as small as wind chimes, and it was the first time she had spoken to Elena. "My name is Elena." Lucia tilted her head, studying Elena for a few seconds more. Then she asked something that made Elena go still. "Did you lose your mom too? Uncle Dom said your mom was a good person." Marco looked at Elena, his expression caught between surprise and worry, as if afraid that question would hurt her. But Elena didn't hurt. Or rather, she had been hurting for so long it had become part of her. She set her coffee down, stood, and walked closer to Lucia. The child didn't flinch the way Elena feared. She only looked up, those wide eyes like 2 glossy dark chestnuts, waiting. Elena knelt so she was level with her. "Yes," she said softly. "My mom is gone. 2 years ago, just like your parents." Lucia blinked. "Are you sad?" "Yes, every day. Uncle Dom is sad too. He doesn't cry, but I know. Sometimes he looks at my mom's picture for a long time." Elena felt her throat tighten. This child was only 5, yet she understood loss more than anyone should have to at that age. "My mom was very good," Elena said, her voice shaking a little. "And I'm sure your mom was too." Lucia was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke again, her voice so small it sounded like she was afraid someone might hear. "My mom used to sing to me before bed. Now nobody sings anymore. Uncle Dom tried, but he's really bad at it." A laugh slipped out of Elena before she could stop it, short and soft, but it was the first laugh she had made in days. And then something almost miraculous happened. Lucia laughed too. It was only a tiny laugh, fleeting as sunlight breaking through cloud, but Marco nearly spilled his coffee from surprise. "She doesn't laugh with strangers," he whispered, looking at Elena like she had performed magic. But Elena knew it wasn't magic. It was the recognition that comes from shared pain. And sometimes, that is the only language broken souls can understand. On the 3rd night in the Castellano mansion, Elena still could not sleep. She lay on the bed, staring up at the darkness coating the ceiling, listening to her own heart beat inside the silence. Too many questions spun through her mind, too many missing pieces in the picture of her mother's life she had thought she understood. The scar on her mother's shoulder, the way her mother always dodged the subject when Elena asked about the past, the way she always changed the topic whenever Elena mentioned anything connected to her work as a nurse. Now Elena understood it hadn't been random evasiveness. It had been a wall built on purpose, hiding a secret her mother had carried for 10 years. Nearly 2 in the morning, Elena gave up on trying to sleep. She left her room, went down the stairs, and headed for the kitchen, hoping a cup of warm milk might help her settle. But the kitchen was not empty the way she expected. A pale yellow glow from a small table lamp spilled from the corner of the adjoining dining area. Dominic was sitting there alone, a glass of whiskey and an old photograph in front of him. He didn't look up when Elena stepped in, as if he had known she was coming before she arrived. "You can't sleep either?" His voice was low and tired in the dark. Elena didn't answer right away. She moved closer, eyes dropping to the photograph in Dominic's hand. A young woman, maybe 18 or 19, with long black hair and a radiant smile. She looked like Dominic in the eyes and the shape of the face, but softer, brighter. "Isabella," Dominic said when he caught Elena's gaze. "My sister." This was taken before everything happened. Elena sat in the chair across from him, keeping her distance but close enough to see Dominic's face in the dim light. She saw the exhaustion carved into the lines around his eyes, saw the ghost of the past haunting those dark irises. "I want the truth," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "All of it. About my mother. About what she did. About why I'm sitting here." Dominic took a sip of whiskey, his eyes still fixed on the photograph. The silence stretched long enough that Elena thought he would not answer. Then he began to speak, his voice the sound of a story buried deep in his chest for a decade. 10 years ago, Isabella was 18, just graduated high school. I was 26. I had just taken over my father's business. She wanted to go to her graduation party with her friends. I didn't want to let her because I knew that area was dangerous, but she begged. She always knew how to make me give in. He paused, his fingertips stroking the glass of the frame. That night there was a shooting. 2 gangs settled their score right on the street where Isabella was walking home. She got trapped between 2 lines of fire, took a bullet in the stomach, and ended up behind a car that was burning. Elena held her breath, seeing it in her mind. The police arrived, but nobody dared go in. The guns were still firing. The flames were still burning. They said they had to wait for backup, wait for it to calm down. But Isabella was bleeding. Every minute that passed was a minute closer to death. Dominic lifted his head and looked straight into Elena's eyes. "And then your mother showed up, Sofia Marchetti, an emergency room nurse. She heard the victim's location over the radio, and when no one would go in, she went in herself. No body armor, no weapon, just a medical kit and her hands." Elena felt tears rise that she could not hold back. She pictured her mother, the thin woman who always coughed in the winter, who had worked 20-hour shifts without rest, who always told Elena that saving people was a calling. She crawled nearly 100 feet across the street, through flying bullets and burning fire, until she reached Isabella. The bullet had torn through an artery. There was so much blood, anyone else would have given up. But your mother didn't. Dominic's voice trembled slightly, something Elena never thought she would witness. She stopped the bleeding, kept Isabella awake, talked to her for 20 minutes until the medical helicopter came, and during that time, she was hit in the shoulder. But she didn't stop, not for a second. "The scar," Elena whispered. "The scar on my mother's shoulder." "Yes," Dominic nodded. "When it was over, I went to the hospital. Isabella survived because of your mother. I knelt by Sofia Marchetti's bed and told her I would repay this debt for the rest of my life. She looked at me and said there was only one thing she wanted." "What?" "Keep her daughter far away from this world. Never let you know. Let you have the normal life she could never have." Elena felt tears sliding down her cheeks and she could not stop them. Her mother had done that. Her mother had hidden it all, carried the scar and the memories alone, just so Elena could live without knowing the dark existed. "I kept my promise for 10 years, Dominic went on, his voice heavy. "Paid the hospital bills, the debts, everything, but always from a distance, always invisible, because that's what she wanted." He set the photograph down, his eyes meeting Elena's in the dark. "Your mother didn't want you to know. She wanted you to have a normal life, and I failed to keep that promise." Elena said nothing. She only sat there, tears falling silently, thinking of the woman who had sheltered her for her entire life. Her mother was a hero. Her mother was the one who had crawled through fire and bullets to save a girl she did not even know. And her mother had taken that secret to the grave, only so Elena would not have to live in the fear her mother had known far too well. The next morning, the air inside the Castellano mansion felt unusually heavy. Elena noticed it the moment she came down the stairs and saw the guards moving with more urgency, their voices low and hurried in the corners of the hallways. She found Lucia sitting alone in the living room, clutching a teddy bear and staring out the window with a worry a 5-year-old should not have to carry. "Uncle Dom is in a meeting," Lucia said when she saw Elena. "When he's in a meeting, everyone stays quiet." Elena sat down beside her without asking anything else. She simply sat there, and somehow her presence made Lucia inch closer, resting her head against Elena's shoulder as if searching for warmth. Nearly an hour later, the door to Dominic's study opened. Marco stepped out first, his face tight, the usual smile gone. Behind him was Dominic, and Elena saw the change immediately. His eyes were darker, his jaw clenched, his whole body pulled taut like a wire stretched to the breaking point. "Elena," Dominic said her name, not Miss Marchetti, the way he had in the days before. "Come in. You need to hear this." She stood, glanced once more at Lucia. Marco nodded, signaling he would stay with the child. Elena walked into the study, the heavy wooden door closing behind her. The room was spacious, lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, an oak desk in the center, and a painting of the Sicilian coast on the wall. Dominic stood by the window with his back to her. "The people watching you weren't random," he began, his voice cold and hard as steel. "We traced the listening device in your apartment. Everything leads back to one name." Elena waited, her heart beating faster. Vincent Moretti. The name rang out like a death bell inside the room. Dominic turned and faced her. "The Moretti family is our sworn enemy. The war between our bloodlines has lasted 20 years, since my father was still alive. Territory, power, spilled blood. Both sides have lost people. The shooting 10 years ago," Elena said, the pieces locking into place in her mind. "Isabella got caught in it." "That was one of our battles." Dominic nodded, not dodging the truth. "Moretti ordered the hit. Isabella was just an innocent victim trapped in the middle. And what does he want now? He wants me dead. He wants the Castellano Empire to collapse. But he knows he can't strike head-on, so he looks for weakness." Dominic moved closer, his gaze locking onto Elena. "He found you." Elena felt the blood in her body turn cold. "Me? You're the person I've been protecting in silence for 10 years. He's watched me long enough to notice. Every time I went to the cemetery, every payment sent into your mother's account, every bill that got covered, he connected it all and understood you matter to me. But we didn't even know each other until a few days ago." "Doesn't matter." Dominic shook his head. "To Moretti, anyone I care about is a target. And he's decided you're the next piece on the board." Elena wanted to say she was nobody's piece. She wanted to scream that she never asked to be dragged into this war, but she knew it would mean nothing. She was here now. There was no way back. A knock at the door cut through her thoughts. Marco stepped in, holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It just came to the gate. No sender name. It's been cleared." Dominic took the package and tore away the paper. Inside was a white envelope. He opened it, and Elena saw his face go still. "What is it?" she asked, her voice shaking beyond her control. Dominic didn't answer. He simply handed her the photo from inside the envelope. Elena looked and felt the world tilt. It was her, in the cemetery, standing at her mother's grave with a cheap bouquet in her hands. The picture had been taken from far away, from a high angle, maybe from a nearby hill. The image was sharp, like something shot by a professional, and beneath the photo, written in red ink, was a single line, so pretty. It would be a shame if something happened. Elena didn't realize she was trembling until Dominic took the photo back from her hands. He looked down at the words, and the expression on his face made Elena understand why people feared Dominic Castellano. It wasn't an explosion of rage. It wasn't shouting or smashing things. It was absolute cold. His eyes were like a frozen lake, not a ripple on the surface, but beneath it a depth that could swallow anyone who dared to step in. Dominic crumpled the photograph in his fist, slowly and deliberately, as if imagining it was someone's throat. He just made his last mistake. His voice was low and even, but Marco shuddered. Even Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine, even though she knew that fury was not aimed at her. She stood in the study of a Mafia boss, holding proof that his enemy was coming for her, and she realized that the ordinary life her mother had fought to preserve was gone forever. 2 weeks passed faster than Elena expected. The first tense, unfamiliar days slowly gave way to a new rhythm, strange but no longer quite so terrifying. She began to memorize the paths through the sprawling house, to know what hour the chef prepared breakfast, what hour Lucia woke up, and what hour Dominic left his study to eat dinner with the family. Family. The word felt odd in Elena's mind when she thought about the people in this house, but she could not find another that fit more precisely. Lucia changed the most. The little girl who had once been shy and withdrawn began coming to Elena every day, sometimes only to sit beside her in silence, sometimes to ask the innocent questions only children think to ask. "Aunt Elena, why are clouds white? Aunt Elena, does my bear dream? Aunt Elena, do you know how to bake? My mom used to bake for me." That last question made Elena pause. She looked into Lucia's wide eyes and saw a longing for her mother that Elena understood too well. "I do," Elena said. "My mom used to bake too. I'll teach you, okay?" And so every afternoon the two of them took over the kitchen. Elena taught Lucia how to mix the flour, how to crack the eggs, how to stir gently so the cake wouldn't turn tough. Lucia stood on a tall stool, her face dusted with flour, grinning every time she did something right. Lucia's laughter echoed through the kitchen, and Elena realized it was a sound she had been missing for so long in her life. At night, Elena read to Lucia before bed, fairy tales about princesses and princes, about magic and happy endings. Lucia lay curled under the covers, her eyelids drooping to Elena's steady voice. And sometimes, when Elena looked up, she saw Dominic standing in the doorway, watching in silence. He never spoke, he only looked, but his eyes were different in those moments. Softer, warmer. A week ago, Lucia called her Aunt Lena for the first time. There was no warning, no special reason. Lucia was just drawing, and all at once she said, "Aunt Lena, look at my picture." Elena froze for a few seconds. Her throat tightened, and she had to turn her face away so Lucia would not see her eyes go red. Marco teased her afterward. "You've officially been promoted. Welcome to the Castellano family." And then there was Dominic. Elena did not know what to call what was happening between them. There were no declarations, no obvious romantic gestures, only small moments, delicate as a spider's web, easy to shatter if someone touched them too hard. Like the morning before last, when she handed him a cup of coffee and their hands brushed. Only a second, but Elena felt as if she'd been shocked. Dominic paused too, his gaze meeting hers, and in that instant time seemed to stop. Then he took the coffee, nodded his thanks, and walked away. But Elena saw the way he clenched his other hand, as if he were holding something back, like last night, when she was reading alone in the living room and Dominic came in. He sat in the chair across from her, said nothing, only worked through a stack of papers in his hands. They sat like that for 2 hours, each in their own world, and yet somehow the silence was not uncomfortable at all. It was comfortable, natural, as if they had been doing this all their lives. Elena began to think that maybe she belonged here. Maybe this was where life had brought her after all the loss and suffering. Maybe her mother had guided her to this place, in her own way. But that night, everything changed. Elena woke at midnight, thirsty. She stepped into the hallway, intending to go down to the kitchen, but she stopped when she heard voices drifting from Dominic's study. The door was slightly open, light spilling out in a strip of yellow across the wooden floor. "I don't care whether he has a family or not," Dominic's voice carried, cold as ice. "He knows too much. He's a threat. Deal with it." Elena stood frozen in place. Deal with it. She knew what that meant in this world. Not firing someone, not throwing them out, but making them disappear. Forever. "Make it clean," Dominic went on, his tone utterly steady. "I don't want any traces. And do it fast, before Moretti knows we've discovered it." Elena took a step back, trying not to make a sound. Her heart hammered wildly in her chest, her blood turning cold in her veins. This was the man who had held Lucia when she cried, the man who had looked at Elena with gentleness in the bright kitchen that morning, the man she had started to think maybe was not as terrible as this world painted him. But the voice in that study held no gentleness at all. Only steel and ice. Only a killing order given as if he were deciding what to eat for dinner. Elena turned back to her room, closed the door, pressed her back to the cold wood, and tried to breathe. She had forgotten. In these 2 weeks, between Lucia's laughter and Dominic's looks, she had forgotten the truth. He was a mafia boss. He ordered people killed. He was not a prince in a fairy tale, and she was living under the roof of a murderer. Elena could not sleep that night. She lay staring at the ceiling until the first light of dawn slipped through the curtains, and she decided she could not keep pretending nothing had happened. She needed answers. She needed to look that man in the eye and hear him admit the truth. That morning she did not go down to the kitchen the way she usually did. She waited until Lucia had finished eating and Marco had taken her to school on the grounds, and only then did she walk to Dominic's study. She knocked once, did not wait for permission, and pushed the door wide open. Dominic was seated behind his desk, papers spread before him, the phone pinned to his shoulder. When he saw Elena step in, something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of surprise that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. "I'll call you back," he said into the phone, then hung up. "Elena, what is it? Deal with it." She repeated the words, her voice shaking, but not from fear. "Last night I heard you give an order to deal with someone. I want to know what that means." Dominic did not look startled. He did not try to excuse it or soften it. He only sat there, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes, as if weighing how much truth she was ready to carry. "You know what it means," he said at last. "You've known since the moment you walked into this house. I want to hear you say it. Kill." Dominic said it without flinching, without dressing it up. "I order people killed. That's what I do when it's necessary." Elena felt as if someone had punched her in the stomach, even though she had known the answer before she asked. But hearing him say it, admitting it with that calm certainty, still hit like a shock. "So what am I doing here?" she asked, her bitterness rising. living under the roof of a killer, eating at the same table with you, teaching Lucia to bake as if this is some normal family. Dominic stood and took a step toward her. Elena backed up a step, but he stopped, keeping his distance. I told you from the first day, his voice low and steady. My world isn't for the weak. You didn't ask, so I didn't tell you. But I have never hidden who I am. Then why are you keeping me here? Because you aren't weak. Dominic looked straight into her eyes. You just don't know how strong you are yet. I saw it the moment you stood in that cemetery, alone, facing 6 armed men, and you still dared to shout in my face. I see it every time you look at Lucia, every time you get back up after whatever life throws at you. Elena did not know how to answer. She stood there, caught between anger and confusion, not sure what she was feeling. Come with me, Dominic said, moving toward the door. There's something you need to see. She wanted to refuse. She wanted to say she did not want to see anything more from his dark world, but her feet still followed, as if her body no longer listened to reason. Dominic led her to a small room at the far end of the basement hallway. Inside was a large monitor, and a man Elena did not recognize sat at a computer. Show her the file, Dominic ordered. The man nodded and typed a few keys. The screen filled with the image and information of a middle-aged man, ordinary-looking, nothing remarkable about him at first glance. This is the man I ordered dealt with last night, Dominic said. Elena stared at the file, and nausea rose in her throat. Human trafficking, a child abduction network. More than 20 documented victims, most of them girls under the age of 10. Pictures of the victims appeared, small faces, frightened eyes. Beside them were photos of children who had been rescued, thin, bruised, their expressions hollow. The police can't touch him, Dominic went on. He has protection, good lawyers, money to buy silence. But I'm not bound by the law. Elena could not speak. She only looked at the screen, at those children's faces, and felt the black and white world she had trusted breaking apart beneath her feet. I'm not a good man, Dominic said, with no hint of pleading. I've killed people. I will kill again. But I have principles. I don't touch innocent women and children. I don't deal drugs or traffic people, and anyone who does that in my territory will pay. He turned to look at her. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not asking you to accept me. I only want you to understand, this world is not as simple as you think. Not everyone called a monster feeds on the innocent, and not everyone in an expensive suit is an angel. Elena stayed silent for a long time. She thought about the children on the screen, about Lucia, about her mother, the woman who had run into bullets and fire to save a stranger. She looked at Dominic, the man with blood on his hands who had still repaid his debt to her mother in silence for 10 years. I don't forgive you, she said at last, her voice soft but clear. I don't know if I ever can, but I understand. And she looked at him differently, not a fairy tale prince, not a monster, just a man in the dark, trying to hold on to what remained of his humanity through principles he had set for himself alone. After the confrontation in that basement room, something shifted between Elena and Dominic in a way that was hard to describe. Not closer, exactly, but no longer held apart by that wary distance from before. They were like two people who had seen each other's darkness and decided it was not enough to make them turn away. Elena no longer startled when Dominic walked into a room. Dominic no longer kept that rigid space between them when he was near her. Their looks lingered longer. Their silences became comfortable instead of suffocating, and Elena realized she was waiting for those moments, even if she did not dare admit it. On the 5th night after that conversation, a storm slammed down on Long Island without a single warning. Rain hammered the windows like 1,000 impatient fingers. Wind shrieked through the seams of the house like the sigh of a giant. And then the power went out, drowning the entire mansion in darkness. Elena was in the living room when everything dropped into black. She heard a small scream from upstairs and knew at once it was Lucia. She ran up the staircase in the dark, one hand sliding along the banister, her heart racing. But when she reached Lucia's room, Dominic was already there. He had the little girl in his arms, Lucia clinging to his neck, her face buried in his shoulder, her whole body trembling. Thunder, Dominic said when he saw Elena. She's been afraid of thunder since she was small. Isabella was too. Elena nodded without speaking. She followed them downstairs, where Marco and a few guards were lighting candles. The flames threw a flickering glow that danced across the walls, casting jumping shadows like ghosts throughout the enormous living room. They sat on the sofa, Lucia still refusing to let go of Dominic. But when Elena sat beside them, Lucia slowly shifted until half her body lay in Dominic's lap and half leaned into Elena, as if she needed both of them to feel safe. The rain kept pouring, the thunder kept growling beyond the windows, but inside their arms, Lucia began to calm. She yawned once, then her eyes drooped. Then her breathing evened out. Elena looked down at the small face, sleeping heavily against her leg, and felt something warm spread through her chest. She lifted her head and caught Dominic's gaze. He was looking at her and at Lucia, and the expression on his face made Elena forget how to breathe. The usual coldness was gone. The assessing look, the guardedness, all of it. He looked at them the way a man looks at something precious, something he fears will shatter if he touches it. "You're good with her," he said, his voice low and rough in the candlelight. "Lucia doesn't let anyone that close. Not besides me and Marco. She just needs someone who understands," Elena answered softly. "I know what it feels like to lose your mother when you're young. Maybe she can feel that." Dominic did not reply. He only kept watching her with a look Elena did not dare try to interpret. Outside, the storm began to ease, the rain turning from a roar into a whisper, but the power still had not returned, and no one wanted to move. Lucia slept so deeply she did not stir when Elena rose carefully and lifted her into her arms. "I'll take her back to her room," she said. Dominic nodded, but he stood as well and followed Elena up the stairs. They said nothing the whole way, only the soft sound of footsteps and Lucia's steady breathing. Elena laid the little girl in bed, pulled the blanket up, kissed her forehead. Lucia shifted, her lips moving around a word that sounded like "mom," and then she sank back into sleep. When Elena stepped into the hallway, Dominic was waiting. He leaned against the wall, the candlelight from a nearby room throwing his shadow long across the wooden floor. In that light he looked softer, more human, no longer a terrifying mafia boss, but a tired man trying to carry the whole world on his shoulders. "You make this house feel like a family," he said, his voice low as if afraid to wake someone. "It's been a long time since I've had that. Since Isabella died, since my father died. This house has only been a place to live, not a place to come home to." Elena stood facing him, only a few steps apart. Her heart beat so fast she thought he might hear it. "I'm not doing anything special," she said. "You are," Dominic replied, stepping closer. "You look at Lucia like she matters. You look at Marco like he isn't the brother of a criminal. And you look at me." He stopped, standing right in front of her, close enough that Elena could smell whiskey and sandalwood on him. "You look at me like I'm still a person." Elena did not step back. She did not know whether she was brave or insane, but she stayed where she was, looking up into those dark eyes, feeling as if she stood at the edge of a cliff. Dominic lifted his hand and touched her cheek, light as a passing breath. His fingers were warm and a little rough, and Elena felt a jolt shoot through her from the place he touched. Then he bent down. The kiss came slowly, more like a question than a declaration. His mouth brushed hers, gentle, hesitant, as if giving her a chance to pull away. But Elena did not pull away. She answered him, her hand resting against his chest, feeling his heartbeat thundering beneath the cloth. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but to Elena it felt like an entire lifetime. When they parted, they were both breathing hard. Elena looked into Dominic's eyes and saw something there she had never seen in him before: hope and fear. "This is a mistake," she whispered, her voice trembling. Dominic did not take his eyes from her. "Maybe," he said, "but I don't want to be right." A week after that kiss in the hallway, Elena felt as if she were living inside a dream she was afraid to wake from. She and Dominic did not talk about what had happened, did not trade promises or make any grand declarations. They simply let it unfold on its own, the way water finds its way downhill, the lingering looks across the breakfast table, fingers brushing when a coffee cup changed hands. The moments they stood side by side at the window, watching Lucia play in the garden, shoulder to shoulder, needing no words and understanding anyway. They kept it secret, or at least Elena thought they did, but Marco would not leave them alone. "You look at her the way you look at the last piece of tiramisu on earth," Marco said to Dominic at dinner, when Elena had just stepped out of the room to take Lucia to wash her hands. "Everyone in this house can see it, you know? Even Mrs. Johnson in the kitchen. She asked me when the wedding is." Elena heard that as she was coming back, and she nearly tripped at the doorway. Dominic shot his brother a look that could have frozen water, but Marco only grinned, completely unaffected. "For the first time in my life I've seen you smile, and it wasn't because somebody was about to die." Marco kept teasing. "Let her stay. This house needs a normal person." Lucia grew more attached to Elena every day. Now she did not only call her Aunt Lena, she came to Elena first whenever anything happened. When she drew a picture she was proud of, Lucia ran straight to Elena to show it off. When she wanted a bedtime story, she demanded Elena tell it. When she had a nightmare, she no longer searched only for Dominic. She called for Elena too. "Aunt Lena, will you stay forever?" Lucia asked one afternoon as they sat drawing together. Elena looked into the child's wide, hopeful eyes and didn't know how to answer. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to promise. But life had taught her that promises were sometimes the cruelest gifts people could give each other. "I'll be here as long as I can," she said, and prayed that would be enough. Those days were so bright Elena almost forgot the darkness waiting out there. Almost. But sometimes she caught Tony Russo watching her. Dominic's longtime advisor, a man of 40 with salt and pepper hair and eyes that never smiled even when his mouth did. He looked at Elena in a way she couldn't read. Not hostile, but not friendly either. As if he were measuring her. As if he were calculating something. Elena noticed. And she saw that Marco noticed too. Once she caught Marco observing Tony with narrowed eyes. But when she asked, he only shook his head and said, "It's nothing." She didn't believe him. But she also didn't want to puncture the fragile bubble of happiness she was living inside. That night, Dominic found Elena on the balcony. He stood beside her, the two of them looking out at the garden washed in moonlight. "When this is settled," he said, his voice gentler than usual, "I'll take you and Lucia to the ocean. A week. No guards, no meetings, nothing. Just the three of us." Elena turned to look at him, and saw in his eyes a simple wish he might never have dared to want before. "I'd like that," she said, and she meant it. She believed his promise. She believed in the future he was sketching in the air. She believed that maybe, after everything, she had finally found where she belonged. She should not have believed. At 3 a.m, Elena woke up thirsty. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling in the dark, then decided to go down to the kitchen instead of trying to fall asleep again. The hallway was black and silent, only the soft sound of her footsteps on the wood floor. Elena had grown used to this house, to every shadowed corner and every passageway, so she didn't need to turn on a light to find her way down. She poured herself a glass of water and drank slowly, letting the quiet of late night settle into her bones. At this hour, the mansion no longer felt like a cold fortress, but like an ordinary home where the people she loved were sleeping peacefully. She set the glass down and turned to go back upstairs, and that was when she heard voices drifting from the west hallway. Tony Russo's voice. Elena didn't know what made her stop instead of walking on. Maybe instinct. Maybe the memory of the unreadable looks she had caught from him over the past week. Maybe the way Marco had watched Tony with suspicion and never explained. She moved quietly toward the voice, the water glass still in her hand. Tony's office was at the end of the corridor. The door cracked open, a weak light spilling out in a thin stripe of yellow across the floor. Elena stopped outside, her back against the wall, her heartbeat quickening. "She sleeps on the second floor, last room at the end of the east hall." Tony's voice was low and urgent. "No guard posted at night. Castellano trusts the outer perimeter too much." Elena went rigid. He was talking about her. "Dominic's schedule this week," Tony went on. "Monday he meets the Chicago men. Wednesday he goes to the port to inspect a shipment. Both times he brings fewer people because he wants to keep it quiet. That's the opportunity." Silence for a moment, as if Tony were listening to someone speaking on the other end. Then he continued, his voice lower, but Elena still heard every word as if it were carved into the air. "I understand, Mr. Moretti. I'll send the security layout tonight. The weakness is at the west gate. The shift changes at 3 a.m. There's a 5-minute gap. If you strike then..." Elena felt as if ice water had been poured straight into her chest. Tony Russo, Dominic's longtime advisor, a man trusted completely, a man who knew every secret of the Castellano family. A traitor. He was selling information to Moretti, reporting her location, exposing the weak points in their security, clearing a path for the enemy to come in and kill Dominic. Elena took a step back, trying not to make a sound. She had to get out of there. She had to warn Dominic. She had to do something before it was too late. But her hands were shaking too hard. The glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the wood floor and shattered with a crack that echoed through the stillness of the night. Everything froze for a single second, then hurried footsteps came from inside the room. The door swung open. Tony Russo stood there, the phone still in his hand, his eyes like knives in the dark. They stared at each other in a moment that stretched like a lifetime. Elena saw calculation flash through his gaze, saw the instant he decided she had heard too much. "Miss Marchetti." Tony's voice was low and even, but there was something deadly in it. "Where are you going at this hour?" I was just getting water. Her voice shook, and she couldn't hide it. Tony looked down at the shattered glass on the floor, then back at her. How much did you hear? Elena didn't answer. She couldn't lie well enough to fool eyes that drilled into her like a tool. Her silence was all the answer Tony needed. He let out a breath, almost like regret for what was about to happen. You shouldn't have heard that, Miss Marchetti. His hand moved, and Elena caught a flash of steel in the dark. A gun. Tony pulled out a gun. Everything happened in a blink. Elena didn't think. She just moved. She spun and ran. Bare feet on cold wood, her heart crashing in her chest, her mind reduced to one single thought. Survive. Stop! Tony shouted behind her. Footsteps chased her, fast and decisive. Elena sprinted down the hallway, throwing herself toward the staircase that led up to the second floor. She needed Dominic's room. The gun fired. Deafening. So close, Elena felt the rush of the bullet slicing past her ear. She stumbled but kept running, a scream tearing out of her throat before she could stop it. Dominic! Her cry ripped apart the silence of the night. Lights snapped on. Feet thundered from different directions. Shouts and orders erupted. Elena hit the last step and slammed into a wall. No, not a wall. Dominic. He stood there, hair mussed, eyes sharp as blades, a gun already in his hand even though only seconds ago he had been asleep. Elena! He grabbed her shoulders. What happened? Elena looked up at him, sweat and tears mingling, panting so hard she could barely speak. Tony, she whispered. Tony is the traitor. He's working for Moretti. Everything happened in only a few minutes, but to Elena it felt like an entire lifetime. Dominic didn't need to hear another word. He issued orders in a voice cold as steel, and the whole mansion erupted like a disturbed hive. His men appeared from everywhere, weapons in hand, moving with the precision of people trained for exactly this moment. Marco charged in, eyes still heavy with sleep but a gun already in his hand. What happened? Tony, Dominic said, clipped. Take him alive. I want him in front of me in 5 minutes. Elena stood inside Dominic's hold, her whole body shaking beyond her control. She heard running feet, shouted commands, doors slamming. Then Tony's voice rang up from downstairs, fury and desperation tangled together. They caught him. Dominic handed Elena off to a guard with clear instructions. Get her to the safe room. No one goes in except me and Marco. Then he vanished down the stairs, leaving Elena with her heart pounding and 1,000 unanswered questions. But Elena didn't stay in the safe room. She waited until the guard turned away, then slipped out and followed the sounds down to the basement. She needed to know. She needed to understand. The basement room was cold under harsh blue-white light. Tony Russo knelt in the center, his hands bound behind his back, blood running from a scrape on his forehead. 4 armed men surrounded him, and standing in front of him was Dominic, his face so cold Elena barely recognized him. His phone, Marco said, handing the device to Dominic. He sent a message before we caught him. Moretti knows we found out. Dominic looked at the screen, his jaw tightening so hard Elena could see the muscle standing out under his skin. Why? He asked Tony, his voice low and even in a way that was terrifying. 15 years. You were with me for 15 years. You were the man my father trusted. Why? Tony lifted his head, and Elena saw something she hadn't expected in his eyes. Not hatred, not greed. Desperation. The desperation of a man backed into a corner. Because he has my daughter. Tony's voice was rough. Moretti took Mia 3 months ago. He sends me pictures of her every week. He knew exactly when I left the house. He knew who I spoke to. He made me believe he had eyes inside these walls. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'll mail me my little girl piece by piece. A heavy silence swallowed the room. Elena saw Dominic's body go rigid, saw something shift in his gaze. Why didn't you tell me? Dominic asked, still cold, but with something else threaded through it now. Because he said if I breathed a word, Mia would die immediately. He told me he has a source close to you. I didn't know who to trust. I couldn't risk her life on a gamble, Dominic. I just couldn't. Tears slid down Tony's face. A man Elena had never seen show emotion. I know I'll die for this. I accept it. But I couldn't watch my daughter die. Dominic. I couldn't. Dominic stood motionless. Elena could see the battle behind those dark eyes. Reason said he should kill. The law of this world said a traitor could not be spared, but something else held him back. He pulled out his gun. Dominic. Elena stepped into the room, ignoring the hands that tried to stop her. Don't. Everyone turned toward her. Dominic frowned, but he didn't order them to take her away. Elena, this isn't your business. He has a child, Elena said, her voice trembling but refusing to retreat. He did this for his daughter, the same way you would do anything for Lucia. She saw the impact of her words in Dominic's eyes. She watched him look down at Tony, then back at her, and in that moment she didn't know what he would choose. Moretti is holding an innocent child, Elena went on. If you kill Tony, that girl will die, and you won't be any different from Moretti. The silence stretched. The room seemed to stop breathing. Then Dominic lowered the gun. Marco, he said, his voice tired. Find Tony's daughter. Use every resource we have. I want her brought here within 24 hours. Marco nodded, his eyes flicking to Elena with surprise he couldn't hide. Then he left. Dominic turned back to Tony. You'll live, not because you deserve it, but because she's right. But you have to disappear, leave the country, and never come back. If I see your face again, no one will be able to save you. Tony nodded, tears still falling. Thank you, he whispered. Don't thank me, Dominic said. Thank her. Dominic's men led Tony away. The room slowly emptied until only the two of them remained. Dominic turned to Elena, his expression so complicated she couldn't read it. You just saved his life, he said. A man who nearly got you killed. Elena met his gaze without flinching. I just showed you that you don't have to be a monster. Not all the time. Not with everyone. Dominic was silent for a long moment. Then he stepped closer, lifted his hand to her cheek, his fingers trembling in a way Elena had never seen from him before. You make me want to be better, he murmured. I don't know what that means in this world, but you make me want to try. Elena laid her hand over his, and in that instant, in the cold room that still smelled faintly of blood and gunpowder, she felt something shift between them, deeper, realer, and more fragile than ever. 2 days after what happened with Tony, the Castellano mansion turned into an impenetrable fortress. The number of guards doubled. More security cameras were installed on every corner. No one was allowed in or out without passing 3 layers of checks. Dominic barely slept, spending most of his time in his study, coordinating the search for Tony's daughter and preparing for the confrontation with Moretti that he knew was coming. Elena could feel the tension in the air, thick as smoke before a storm, but she tried to keep everything normal for Lucia. The little girl didn't need to know about the dangers closing in. She only needed to be a 5-year-old, with the only worries in her world being where her teddy bear slept and what she would eat today. On the afternoon of the second day, Elena decided to take Lucia into the garden. The child had been kept indoors too long, her eyes starting to look dull the way a flower does when it has no light. The garden sat inside the estate grounds, enclosed by high walls and a security system, supposed to be the safest place of all. 4 guards followed them, spread to the 4 corners of the garden, their eyes constantly sweeping the surroundings. Elena sat on a stone bench near the fountain, watching Lucia chase a yellow butterfly. The child's laughter rang out in the autumn afternoon, clear and carefree, and Elena felt warmth bloom in her chest. This was why she stayed, not because of Dominic, not because of protection, but because of this child, the one who called her Aunt Lena and looked at her with eyes full of trust. Aunt Lena, look! Lucia held up a red, heart-shaped leaf she had just picked up. Isn't it pretty? It's very pretty, Elena smiled. Want to take it back and give it to Uncle Dom? Lucia nodded eagerly, pressing the leaf to her chest like a treasure. Everything seemed peaceful, safe, normal, and then one of the guards collapsed. There was no gunshot, only a small, soft pop, and the tall man who had been standing watch suddenly dropped onto the grass, blood spilling from a hole in his forehead. Before Elena could even understand what was happening, the second guard fell, then the third, then the fourth. Like dominoes knocked down, 4 trained men went down in less than 10 seconds. A sniper, from somewhere beyond the wall. Elena shot to her feet, her heart slamming. Lucia, come here right now. Lucia stood in the middle of the garden, eyes wide with fear, not understanding what was happening. Before Elena could reach her, a horrible explosion ripped through the air. The estate's iron gate blew apart, and a black truck burst through, crushing everything in its path. It stopped in the courtyard, doors flying open, and men in black poured out like ants. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Screams rose from inside the house. Chaos. Elena ran to Lucia, grabbed her hand, and dragged her toward the back of the garden. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get Lucia out. But they were surrounded. 2 men blocked the path ahead. 3 more came from behind. Elena stopped, pulled Lucia into her arms, shielding the child with her body. Her eyes swept frantically for an escape, and she saw one. An SUV parked near a rosebush, the clearance beneath it just high enough for a 5-year-old to crawl under. "Lucia?" Elena dropped to her knees, gripping the child's shoulders, looking straight into eyes swimming with tears. "Listen to me. You're going to crawl under that SUV and stay there. Don't come out no matter what happens. Don't cry. Don't make a sound. Promise me." "But Aunt Lena..." "Promise me." Lucia nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. Elena kissed her forehead, then pushed her toward the vehicle. "Go, now." Lucia ran, tiny feet skimming the grass, and slid under the SUV just as the attackers moved closer to Elena. Elena turned to face them, standing tall even though her whole body was shaking, trying to pull their attention toward her instead of the car. "There she is," one of the men said into a radio. "Alone. Don't see the kid. Bring her in. The boss wants to meet." Elena tried to run, but she wasn't fast enough. An arm clamped around her. She fought, clawing, biting whatever she could reach. But there were too many of them, too strong. The first punch hit her in the stomach and folded her over. The second slammed into her face, and the world began to blur. Before the dark swallowed her whole, Elena heard crying, small and choked, from under the SUV. "Aunt Lena. Aunt Lena." She wanted to answer, to tell Lucia everything would be okay, that she would come back, but she couldn't. They dragged her into the truck, and Lucia's crying was the last thing Elena heard before everything went black. Dominic was in his study when the gunfire echoed through the house. He burst out, a gun already in his hand, and what he saw outside looked like hell breaking loose on his own grounds. Guards' bodies lay scattered. The iron gate had been blown apart. Smoke and flames rose from a vehicle that had been hit. And in the middle of all that chaos, there was no sign of Elena or Lucia. Dominic's heart seemed to stop for a single moment. He ran down to the garden, where his men were gathering, barking orders and checking the wounded. Marco met him halfway, his face pale, but his eyes lighting up when he saw him. "Lucia's safe," Marco said quickly. "We found her under a car." But Dom... He didn't need Marco to finish. He already knew. "Elena, they took her." Dominic stood there and the world around him fell into silence. The gunshots, the shouting, the distant sirens, all of it vanished. Only 4 words kept ringing in his head. "They took her. They took Elena." "Bring Lucia to me," he said, his voice so calm it made Marco shiver. This wasn't the calm of a man who had accepted loss. It was the calm of a storm gathering strength before it destroyed everything in its path. A guard carried Lucia over. She was sobbing, her face flushed, her whole body shaking. When she saw Dominic, she wriggled free and threw herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck as if she feared he would disappear too. "Uncle Dom, Uncle Dom," Lucia cried, her voice so choked it barely made sound. "They took Aunt Lena. I saw them pulling her. I wanted to come out, but she told me to stay." Dominic held his niece against him, one hand stroking her hair, trying to steady the child's panic. But his eyes stared into the distance, colder than ice, darker than night. "Tell me," he said gently. "What did Aunt Lena tell you?" She told me to crawl under the SUV," Lucia sobbed. "She said don't come out no matter what. She said I had to live. And then they hit her, Uncle. They hit her and they dragged her away." Lucia's voice shattered into uncontrollable crying. Dominic held her tighter, but inside him something broke apart. Elena had saved Lucia. She had sacrificed herself to protect his niece. She had done what anyone in his family would do, even though she had never truly belonged to this world. And now she was in Moretti's hands, alone, with no one to protect her. Dominic handed Lucia to Marco with a short order. "Get her to the safe room. Stay with her until I come back." Then he walked into his study and closed the door. Alone in the familiar room, Dominic stood at the window looking out at the garden being torn apart. He didn't shout. He didn't smash anything. He didn't do what people would expect from a boss who had just been attacked. He only stood there in silence and let the fear he had buried for years rise to the surface. He was afraid. For the first time since Isabella died, Dominic Castellano was afraid. Not of Moretti, not of war, not of death. He was afraid of losing Elena, afraid she would never come back, afraid he would never again see her smile as she held Lucia, afraid he would never again hear her tell him he didn't have to be a monster. She had changed him. In just a few short weeks, she had made him believe that maybe, after everything, he still had the right to be a good man. And now she was in the hands of his enemy, paying for his sins. Dominic clenched his hands into fists, his knuckles going white. Then he turned, walked out, and his face settled back into that familiar coldness. Only now it was more frightening than ever. Marco was waiting in the hallway. "How bad is it?" Dominic asked. 4 dead, 6 injured. They hit fast and pulled out clean. Professional. Planned. Tony gave them everything they needed. Dominic's voice held no emotion, but Marco could see the storm churning in his brother's eyes. "Find Elena," Dominic ordered. "Use everyone, every connection, every set of eyes on the street. I want to know where she is within 6 hours. And Moretti, set up a meeting with him, face to face." Marco hesitated. "You know it's a trap. He wants you to come. He'll—" "I know." Dominic cut him off. "I know it's a trap. I know what he wants. But he's holding something I can't lose, Marco. And I'm going to take it back, even if I have to burn this entire world down." Elena woke to pain radiating through her entire body, her head throbbing as if someone had struck it with a hammer, her vision smeared in the dark, and her wrists burning where a coarse rope bit tight. She forced her eyes open, blinking until the weak light around her came into focus, and she realized she was in an abandoned warehouse. Old brick walls stained with damp, a rusted tin roof broken in places to show patches of dull gray sky, the air thick with the stench of motor oil and dust, and she was seated on a wooden chair with her hands bound behind her back and her ankles tied to the legs, the rope tightening cruelly when she tried to wrench free, until it cut into her skin and blood seeped, wetting her wrists. Around her stood 4 or 5 men in black, guns held ready, faces blank and cold as if she were nothing more than an object, and none of them spoke. They simply waited. Then footsteps sounded from farther off, slow and even, each step measured as if planned, and a man emerged from the shadows, and Elena understood at once he was the one at the center of it all. Vincent Moretti, about 45 years old, salt and pepper hair combed neatly back, an expensive gray suit without a wrinkle, polished leather shoes catching the dim light, a face handsome in the way of a wealthy gentleman with ice blue eyes and a permanent courteous smile, yet danger coiled beneath that refinement like a snake wearing beautiful skin, patient, poised to strike. He said at last that she was finally awake, and offered a smooth apology for the roughness of his men, explaining they could be overly enthusiastic. Elena gave him no answer, only held his gaze, chin lifted despite the ache in every limb. He asked if she knew why she was here, drew a chair close, and sat across from her as if he had all the time in the world. Elena rasped that she was bait, that he wanted to use her to lure Dominic in, and Moretti clapped softly like a teacher praising a student, saying she was smart and he liked smart people, telling her she was correct, that Castellano would come to save her, and when he did, Moretti would end this 20-year war once and for all. Elena asked if he thought she would beg, if he expected tears and pleading, promises to do anything, and Moretti tilted his head, amusement glittering, asking whether she was not afraid to die. Elena told him she had watched her mother die day after day for 2 years, had sat beside the bed and watched her grow thinner, weaker, suffering minute by minute until there was nothing left to take, and asked if he thought he was frightening, because he was not even a small part of what she had already endured. The silence that followed stretched heavy, and when Moretti looked at her again it was different, the contempt or indifference replaced by something like recognition, even respect, flickering in those cold blue eyes before he laughed. A soft sound that chilled Elena more than any threat. He said she was like her mother, Sophia Marchetti, and began to circle her chair the way a predator circles prey, saying Sophia had stared into the mouth of a gun without blinking, that even with blood soaking her shoulder she had not trembled. Elena went rigid, and Moretti asked if she believed he knew her mother, then stopped in front of her with a smile colder than ice, and said he had been there on that fateful night, the night her mother crawled into bullets and fire to save the Castellano brat. Elena felt as if a fist had slammed into her chest as Moretti asked if she thought it had been a random shooting, because no, he said slowly, as if savoring every word. It had been an assassination. He had ordered Isabella Castellano killed to send a message to Dominic, and that 18-year-old girl was supposed to die that night. Elena could not breathe, and Moretti continued that then her mother appeared, an emergency nurse nobody knew, crawling through gunfire and flames, rescuing his target right in front of him, his men shooting her, but she did not stop. She saved Isabella and ruined his perfect plan, and tears slid down Elena's cheeks as she understood the scar on her mother's shoulder had not been a stray bullet. Moretti had tried to kill her. He said he searched for Sophia afterward, hungry for revenge, but Castellano protected her too well, and then she died of illness before he could do anything, and he bent down until he was face to face with Elena and said fate was truly cruel, that the daughter of the woman who had destroyed his plan 10 years ago, was now sitting here in front of him, and this time no one would save her. Elena stared into those ice-blue eyes and understood at last that her mother had not only saved Isabella, she had stepped between Moretti and his target, blocked the design of a Mafia boss, paid with a bullet in her shoulder and a life spent in hiding afterward. And now Elena was standing where her mother once stood, between Moretti and the people she loved. 6 hours later, Dominic stood in front of an abandoned warehouse in the suburbs of New Jersey, alone. At least that was how it looked. He wore a black suit, no body armor, no gun in his hand, exactly as Moretti had demanded during the negotiation call. Around him was the darkness of late night and the terrifying silence of a deserted industrial zone. The warehouse door opened and 4 armed men stepped out, guns aimed straight at Dominic. They searched him, checking every part of his body, then nodded to signal he was clean. "The boss is waiting," one of them said, his voice cold as a machine. Dominic followed them inside, his eyes sweeping quickly across the space. The warehouse was wide and empty, weak industrial lights hanging from the high ceiling. In the center was Elena, still tied to a chair, her face bruised, her lips split, but her eyes still bright when she saw him. And beside her, a hand resting on her shoulder like an owner on his property, stood Vincent Moretti, Castellano. Moretti smiled, triumph undisguised. "So you finally came. I have to say, this girl matters to you more than I thought. You even came alone, unarmed, exactly as I asked." Dominic did not answer. He only looked at Elena, and in the instant their eyes met, she saw what Moretti did not, the cold calculation behind the calm. "She has nothing to do with the war between us," Dominic said, his voice level. "Let her go. Whatever you want, I will negotiate." "Negotiate?" Moretti laughed out loud. "You are not in a position to negotiate, Castellano. You came here alone, without a gun, surrounded by 20 of my men. You came here to die, not to negotiate. Then why don't you kill me?" Dominic took 1 step forward, as calm as if he were out for a walk. "Or do you want to talk first?" Moretti frowned, disliking his opponent's tone. Something was wrong, but he could not name what. "You think you can play with me?" He pulled a gun and aimed it at Dominic's head. "You think this is a game?" At that exact moment, everything dropped into darkness. The power cut. The entire warehouse went pitch black in a single instant. Then guns fired, not one shot but a barrage from every direction, ripping the dark apart with flashes and deafening thunder. Screams rose, glass shattered as the high windows were smashed, footsteps pounded and bodies fell. Marco led the assault team charging in through the west door. 15 men fully equipped, wearing night vision goggles, moving like ghosts through the dark. They had surrounded the warehouse before Dominic walked in, waiting for the signal. And that signal was Dominic getting close enough to Elena to shield her when the chaos began. Dominic did not wait. The moment the lights went out, he moved, lunging straight toward Elena by instinct and by memory of where she sat. One of Moretti's men blocked him, and Dominic dropped him with a punch to the throat. A second rushed in, and Dominic tore the gun from his hand, turned, and fired back. Cold, precise, brutal. This was the Dominic Castellano the underworld feared, not the man who held his niece when she cried, not the man who kissed Elena in a dark hallway, but the Mafia boss who had built an empire on the blood and bones of his enemies. He fought through the warehouse, stepping past the bodies of men who went down, his eyes fixed on only one target, Elena. When he reached her, emergency lights snapped on, throwing a ghostly red over everything. Bodies lay scattered. Marco's men were taking control, capturing whoever was still alive, dealing with anyone who resisted. But Moretti had been faster. He stood behind Elena, one hand locked around her throat, the other pressing a gun to her temple. His eyes were wild under the red light, like an animal driven into a corner. "Stop!" Moretti shouted, his voice stripped of its polite disguise. "One more step and she dies." Dominic stopped 5 steps away. The gun in his hand was aimed straight at Moretti, but Moretti was using Elena as cover, and there was no clean shot. "Put the gun down," Moretti ordered. "Tell your men to back off. If not, I will blow her head open right in front of you." Elena looked at Dominic, and fear was no longer in her eyes. She had been afraid enough in her life. She had watched her mother die, had lost everything, had been dragged into this world without a choice. Now she had nothing left to fear except losing him. "Dominic," she said, her voice strangely calm. "Don't." He looked at her, and she saw the pain in his eyes, the pain of a man about to lose the one thing that mattered most. "Don't worry," he said softly. only loud enough for her to hear. "I won't lose you." Moretti laughed like a madman. How touching. The cold Mafia boss, Dominic Castellano, loving a poor girl, the daughter of a nurse. "Your father would turn in his grave if he knew." "My father is dead," Dominic replied, his voice ice cold. "And you are about to be dead. I have a hostage," Moretti shouted, pushing the barrel harder against Elena's head. "You are not in control here." Dominic did not answer. He only looked at Elena, and she understood. She remembered what he had said on the storm night, in the dark hallway, in the bright kitchen. "You are stronger than you think." And Elena knew what she had to do. Time seemed to stop in that instant. Elena felt the icy barrel pressed to her temple, Moretti's ragged breath at the back of her neck, and Dominic's eyes locked on her through the red wash of the emergency lights. She saw the pain in his gaze, the frantic calculation of a man trying to save the woman he loved without letting her die, the fear he was fighting to hide and could not, and she remembered his words, that she was stronger than she thought. She had been strong. She had been strong all her life without realizing it, strong enough to watch her mother die day after day and still wake up every morning, strong enough to face strangers in a cemetery, strong enough to step into this world and not collapse. And she would be strong now. Moretti was focused on Dominic, the gun still at Elena's head, but his attention fixed on the enemy in front of him. And that was his mistake. Elena did not wait. She drew one deep breath, gathered every shred of strength left in her exhausted body, and moved. Her elbow slammed backward, striking Moretti in the stomach with everything she had. He doubled over in shock, his gun hand jerking off target for the fraction of a second she needed. Elena twisted to the left and dropped to the ground, slipping out of the line of fire. And Dominic fired. One shot, only one. The crack split the warehouse like thunder, and Moretti went down. The bullet punched through his forehead, precise to the millimeter, ending the life of the enemy the Castellano family had fought for 20 years. Elena lay on the cold concrete, her ears ringing from the shot, her heart hammering so hard she thought it would burst. She turned her head toward Moretti and saw him sprawled there, blood pooling beneath his skull, those ice-blue eyes already losing their light. But his mouth still moved. Elena crawled closer, not knowing what drove her, maybe instinct, maybe the need to hear the final words of the man who had shattered her mother's life. "Your mother," Moretti whispered, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "She should have died that night. I didn't miss. I didn't shoot wide." His eyes bored into Elena as if he wanted to drag his hatred into the grave. "I aimed for her heart." She turned. The bullet hit her shoulder. Then those blue eyes went empty, and Vincent Moretti died with a bitter smile on his lips. Elena sat there, frozen, tears sliding down her cheeks without her noticing. The scar on her mother's shoulder. Her mother had always said it was an accident, a stray bullet in the chaos, but it wasn't. Moretti had aimed for her mother's heart. Her mother had turned to shield Isabella, and the bullet had dropped into her shoulder. Her mother had almost died not because of bad luck, but because she chose to save someone. "Elena." Dominic's voice was close, and she felt his hands on her shoulders, pulling her into his arms. He held her so tightly she could barely breathe, but she did not want him to let go. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and she heard something in his voice she had never heard before. Trembling, fear. "Are you hurt? Elena, look at me. Are you hurt?" She lifted her head and looked into his eyes. Those dark eyes were wet, and his hands were shaking as he brushed her hair back, checked the bruises on her face, held her as if she might vanish the moment he released her. "I'm okay," she said, her voice raw. "I'm okay." Dominic didn't answer. He only held her tighter, his face buried in her hair, and Elena felt her shoulder grow damp. The cold Mafia boss, the man who could kill without blinking, was crying in her arms. "I thought I lost you," he whispered, his voice breaking apart. "I thought I was too late. I thought—" "You weren't too late," Elena said, her arms around his back. "You came. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Around them, Marco and Dominic's men were securing the scene, checking Moretti's body, taking prisoners. But for Elena and Dominic, the world no longer existed. There was only the two of them, holding each other in blood and gun smoke, beside the corpse of an enemy and the wreckage of a 20-year war. The war was over. Moretti was dead. The debt Elena's mother created 10 years ago had finally been repaid in a way no one could have imagined. And in the middle of all that chaos, Elena understood something. She was no longer the nameless poor girl standing at her mother's grave. She was the one who had saved herself, the one who had stood up in the dark, the one who had found a family in the last place she ever expected, and she would never let that go. The drive home felt like the longest stretch of time Elena had ever lived through. She sat in Dominic's lap, her head against his shoulder, her whole body aching. Yet she didn't want to let go of his warmth for even a second. He held her the entire way, one hand smoothing her hair, his mouth murmuring words she couldn't quite make out but knew were meant to steady her. When the car stopped in front of the Castellano mansion, Elena saw every window blazing with light. Dominic's men stood along the drive, nodding as they passed, but no one spoke. They all knew what had happened. They all knew the war was over. The family doctor was waiting in the living room. He examined the bruises on Elena's face, bandaged the rope cuts on her wrists, gave her pain medicine and antibiotics. Through it all, Dominic stood close, his eyes never leaving her, as if she might disappear if he blinked. "She needs rest," the doctor said when he finished. "No serious injuries, but her body is exhausted. A few days of staying still and she'll recover." Dominic nodded, but before he could say anything, small footsteps pattered on the stairs. "Aunt Lena." Lucia barreled down like a tiny storm, black hair wild, eyes red from crying. Marco hurried after her, trying to stop her, but no one could stop Lucia now. She ran straight into Elena, wrapping her arms around her with all the strength a 5-year-old could summon, sobbing against her chest. "You promised," Lucia cried, her voice so choked it barely formed words. "You promised you wouldn't disappear. I waited so long. I was scared you wouldn't come back like my mom and dad." Elena felt her heart crack. She dropped to her knees and pulled Lucia close, letting her own tears spill into the child's hair. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry I scared you. But I'm back. I'm not going anywhere. Promise. I promise." Lucia clung tighter, her face pressed into Elena's neck, her whole little body trembling. Elena lifted her eyes to Dominic standing above them and saw him watching the two of them with an expression she could not put into words. That night, no one wanted to be alone. Lucia refused to go back to her own room, holding on to Elena as if she feared she would vanish in the dark. In the end, the three of them lay on the large bed in Dominic's room, Lucia in the middle, Elena on the left, Dominic on the right. Lucia slept hard between them, one hand holding Elena's, one hand holding Dominic's, as if she believed both of them would leave if she let go. In the darkness, over the sleeping child's body, Dominic reached across and took Elena's hand. Their fingers laced together, warm and certain. "You risked your life for Lucia," he whispered, only loud enough for Elena to hear. "You hid her and let them take you. You could have died." "I know," Elena said, tightening her grip on his hand. "But I couldn't let them take her. I couldn't." "Why?" Elena was quiet for a moment, thinking about that question. Why had she been willing to die for a child who wasn't her blood? Why had she gambled her life for a family she had only stepped into a few weeks ago? "Because of her," she said at last. "Because of you. Because of this family." She heard Dominic draw in a long breath in the dark. Family. It was the first time she had used that word for them. "Stay with me," he said, his voice trembling in a way Elena recognized as restraint. "Not because of the debt to your mother. Not because of protection. Stay because I need you. Lucia and I both need you." Elena looked down at the little girl sleeping between them, her face peaceful for the first time in days. She thought of her mother, who had sacrificed everything so Elena could have an ordinary life. What would her mother say if she could see Elena now, lying in the bed of a Mafia boss, in a house full of guards and secrets, beside an orphaned child and a man with blood on his hands? Maybe her mother would understand, because her mother had loved in a way that logic could not explain, had sacrificed for people who were not her blood, had seen light in darkness where others saw only black. "I'm not going anywhere," Elena said, and she meant it. Dominic squeezed her hand, and in the dark she knew he was smiling. Outside the windows, dawn began to rise, spilling pale gold into the room. A new day began, a new chapter opened, and for the first time in her life, Elena was not afraid of the future. 3 months passed like one long dream. The Castellano mansion no longer felt like the cold fortress Elena had sensed when she first arrived. Now Lucia's laughter ran through the hallways every day, the smell of baked bread drifted from the kitchen on weekend afternoons, and the way Dominic looked at Elena had softened into something Marco swore was turning my brother into a completely different man. The Moretti family had fractured after Vincent's death, the ones left either fleeing or submitting, and Castellano territory was steadier than it had ever been. Dominic began shifting part of the operation into legitimate business, saying he wanted to build something Lucia could be proud to inherit someday. And Elena, she had found her place in this house, not as a guest, not as a hostage, but as part of the family. On a Sunday morning at the start of winter, the black SUV rolled to a stop outside Greenwood Cemetery. Elena stepped out, drew in a deep breath of the familiar cold air, and felt as if she were coming home. Dominic stepped out after her, holding Lucia's hand. Lucia wore a white dress today, clutching a bouquet of white roses she had chosen herself that morning. "Is this where Grandma Sophia is, Aunt Lena?" Lucia asked, eyes wide as she looked around. "Yes, sweetheart," Elena smiled. "Let me take you to meet her." They climbed the worn stone steps Elena knew by heart, and she realized something was different. Her mother's grave no longer looked lonely and bleak the way it had before. The grass had been neatly trimmed, flowers planted around it, and a small stone bench placed nearby so visitors could sit. But what stopped Elena was the headstone. It was still her mother's simple marker, but beneath the name and dates, a new line had been carved. A silent hero, never forgotten. Tears rose in Elena's eyes as she turned to Dominic. He stood with his hands in his pockets, calm as if this were nothing at all. "When did you do this?" she asked, her voice thick. "Last month, when you were away." "I came here alone," he shrugged. "Your mother deserved to be remembered the right way." Elena could not speak. She only stepped forward, knelt at her mother's grave, and let the tears fall freely. Lucia sat beside her and placed the white roses on the grave with the careful seriousness of a child doing something that mattered. "Hello, Grandma Sophia," Lucia said, her voice clear. "I'm Lucia. Aunt Lena tells me a lot about you. You cooked really well, right? Aunt Lena taught me to bake using your recipe. I can do it now. Only it gets a little burnt." Elena laughed through her tears and smoothed the child's hair. Lucia kept talking to the headstone as if she were speaking to a real grandmother, telling her about school, about Uncle Dom, about the neighbor's new cat, about all the small, ordinary things of daily life. And Elena sat there listening, feeling her mother close, somewhere just out of sight. When Lucia ran off to chase a butterfly nearby, Elena stood, faced her mother's grave, and began to speak. "Mom, I have so much I want to tell you. About Dominic, about Lucia, about everything that happened. You know, my life changed completely from the day I met those men in black suits standing around your grave." She told her everything, about the fear at the beginning, the doubt, the moment she discovered the secret her mother had carried for 10 years, about a love that came from the last place she ever expected, about finding a family when she had believed she would be alone forever. When she turned back, Dominic was right behind her, but he wasn't standing. He was kneeling, down on one knee, right in front of Sophia Marchetti's grave, holding an open red velvet box that revealed a diamond ring flashing in the winter sun. "I know I should be doing this somewhere more romantic," Dominic said, his voice shaking in a way Elena rarely heard. "But I wanted to ask your mother first." He lifted his eyes to the headstone as if he were speaking to Sophia herself. "I want to ask your permission to let me love your daughter for the rest of my life, to let me protect her, cherish her, be worthy of her. I know I'm not perfect. I know my world is full of darkness, but Elena is my light, and I will spend my whole life trying to deserve that light." Then he turned to Elena, his dark eyes shining with something she had never seen in him before. "Elena Marchetti, will you stay with me?" Elena stood there, tears streaming, laughing and crying at the same time. She looked down at Dominic, then at her mother's headstone, then at Lucia running back toward them with an eager, curious face. "Mom would say you talk too much," she laughed. Dominic laughed too, relieved and happy. "So that's a yes. It's a yes." 3 years later, Elena woke to warm sunlight pouring through the curtains and the rich scent of coffee rising from downstairs. She lay still for a moment, one hand resting on the gently rounded belly beginning to lift beneath the thin blanket, and she smiled. Life had changed so much since the day she stood in the cemetery and saw men in black suits surrounding her mother's grave. Tiny footsteps pattered along the hallway and pulled her out of her thoughts. The bedroom door flew open, and an 8-year-old girl with curly black hair burst in, already dressed in her school uniform with a backpack on her shoulders. "Mom, I'm going to be late for school." Lucia bounced onto the bed, her eyes shining. "Uncle Marco said he'll take me because Dad has an early meeting today, but I wanted to say hi to Mom first." "Mom." The word still warmed Elena's heart every time she heard it. Lucia had started calling her that 6 months after the wedding, as naturally as if it had always been true. And for Elena, it was true. She did not give birth to Lucia, but she loved her with her whole heart. "Have fun at school," Elena said, kissing Lucia's forehead. "Tell Mom about your day when you get home." "Yes." Lucia dashed toward the door, then turned back, her eyes dropping to Elena's belly. "Mom, remember to tell the baby that Big Sister loves him. I want him to come out soon so we can play." Then she vanished into the hallway, her laughter echoing behind her. Elena sank back, her hand stroking her belly. 3 months. The doctor said it was a boy. Dominic had cried when he heard the news, even though he would never admit it. Familiar footsteps sounded, and Dominic walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one on her bedside table, kept the other in his hand, then sat on the edge of the bed and bent to kiss his wife's forehead. "Did you sleep well?" "I slept great," Elena smiled. "He kicked all night, but I still slept." Dominic placed his hand on her belly, his eyes soft in a way only she ever got to see. The cold mafia boss he once was had become a devoted husband, a loving father, and a man rebuilding his empire in a way his children could be proud of. 70% of the Castellano work had now shifted into legitimate business, real estate, imports, premium security services, and Dominic said he wanted to build something clean for Lucia and the baby on the way. Elena was the chief executive officer of one of the companies in the group, the real estate firm she had helped grow from nothing. The business administration degree she completed after the wedding was being used the way it was meant to be used, and she loved her work. Marco had married too, a gentlewoman he met at a charity event Dominic forced him to attend. His wife was pregnant with their first child, and the 2 babies would be born only a few months apart. The Castellano family was growing in a way no one had ever expected. That afternoon, as they did every week, the whole family went to visit Sophia's grave. Greenwood Cemetery was the same as ever, with worn stone steps and chipped stone angels. But Sophia Marchetti's plot was now overflowing with fresh flowers, carefully tended, never lonely. Lucia ran ahead and set down a bouquet she had chosen herself. "Hi, Grandma Sophia," she called out, her voice bright with excitement. "I have good news. I'm going to have a baby brother. A brother. I'm going to teach him to play ball and bake the way Mom taught me. Are you happy, Grandma?" Elena stood beside Dominic, hand in hand, watching her daughter talk to the headstone as if she were speaking to a real grandmother. Tears rose in Elena's eyes, but they were happy tears. Dominic gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Any regrets?" he asked, the question he still asked every time they came here. Elena looked at her mother's grave, then at Lucia skipping around the fountain nearby, then down at her belly where a small life was growing, then at the man beside her who had changed her entire world. "Only one thing," she said softly. "I wish Mom could have met them. Met Lucia. Met you. Met the baby who's coming. She would have loved them so much." Dominic pulled her into his arms and kissed the top of her head. "She's watching," he whispered. "I believe that." Elena rested her head against her husband's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, and she felt peaceful. 3 years ago, she was a poor, lonely girl carrying debts she could never repay and grief for her mother that would not ease. She came to the cemetery that day with a cheap bouquet and a shattered heart, never imagining her life was about to change forever. She found men in black suits standing around her mother's grave. She found a mafia boss paying a silent debt. She found an orphaned little girl who needed love, and she found home. A poor girl found men in black suits standing around her mother's grave, and she also found family. This story reminds us that sometimes love comes from the places we least expect. That family is not only blood, but the people who choose to stay with one another through the storms. That the kindness we plant today can bloom into a miracle for the people we love years later, and that it is never too late to find where you belong. If this story touched your heart, please press the like button and share the video with people who love romantic emotional stories. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you do not miss the most engaging videos every day. How do you feel about this story? Did it make you think of something in your real life? Please share your feelings in the comments below. We truly look forward to hearing the thoughts from deep within your hearts. Thank you for watching until the very last minute. We wish all of you watching this video good health, a joyful life, and peaceful happy days always. Goodbye, and see you again in the next stories.